Hello and welcome to another one of our financial specials here on the Blue Room. I'm joined by the senior correspondent from Off the Pitch, James Corbett, to talk all about 777, who look like they're going to be our new owners. First, we need to know what they're all about. We need to understand what they're going to bring to us. We need to understand what they have already in the financial football world, as well as the other bits and pieces that they have as a company. So, James, you're back to have a good chat about this once again. We've seen things since we last spoke, have changed quite a lot, and it looks like Everton are going to be owned by a different group who we spoke quite a lot about when we last had a chat here on the Blue Room. 777, and if I recall when we did speak last time, it was between them and MSP, and we spoke about the concerns regarding both of them, the positivity regarding both of them, which I recall was specifically with MSP, if they were coming in. That, as in typical Everton style, been and gone, and they are not involved. 777 have come to the fore, who we did speak quite a bit about. Plain and simple, really, to get the ball rolling. What are 777 like? I know we mentioned it last time, but just to give everybody a sort of recap of what they are like as a company.
What they like as a company? I mean, that's quite a big question.
So, a generic question.
So they have lots of business interests. I mean, they pull in investment. I mean, they're an investment fund, for want of a better description. They pull in investment and they go and invest in businesses. They have a sports division, which we'll talk about, but they also have other interests such as airlines, and they're very heavily involved in settlements for insurance claims in America. So, for instance, if you're in a car crash and you're injured in the States, you might get like a $1 million settlement from the insurers, but it'll be payable over 20 years or 25 years or 30 years or whatever. What their business is called Southern Pot Capital does is they will go to a person and say, well, we'll give you $500,000 now, and they will then take the payments over that 25 or 30-year period on your behalf. It's quite controversial. It's not something that's really done in Europe, where financial markets are more regular, and there's been all sorts of accusations of abuses involving one of their companies. They're also involved in airlines, budget airlines. They own one in Australia. They own one in Canada. Again, there's been controversies and court cases involving them. They had 4 Boeing planes repossessed, which was quite unusual, apparently, for the airline business. And then they're involved in other areas. They're involved in media. They have interest in some streaming companies, and they have a sports division which has interests in basketball. So it has a private equity stake in British basketball, and also the London Lions, which is quite a prominent British basketball team. And then, of course, they have their network of football clubs, of which I think Everton will be the 7th. So that's what they're about. They're not involved in mega money in the way that Clearlake, who bought Chelsea, are. Clearlake have, I think, $70 or $80 billion under management. 777 have reportedly $6 billion under management, which is still significant. Although this hasn't been verified, they're not actually obliged to disclose what they have under management. They've been involved in buying football clubs since 2018. They bought a stake in Sevilla, a minority stake in 2018. And then in the last 2 years, they've been going on this spree, starting with Genoa in Italy, Italy's oldest football club, which they bought in September 2021. They subsequently bought Standard Liège, Paris FC, which is a third-tier club in France, Vasco da Gama in Brazil, Hertha Berlin, Melbourne Victory in Australia, and now they've agreed to buy Farhad Mashiri's shares in Everton, subject to a number of regulatory checks, including the Premier League's owners and directors test and the Financial Conduct Authority. Premier League has recently updated its ownership criteria, did this in March this year, so they will have to show that they have the funds to buy Everton. They're not allowed to do a leverage buyout, which is effectively what happened at Man United, where the Glazer family borrowed the money to buy Man United and effectively use Man United's profits to pay off that mortgage. So that won't be allowed. They'll have to have the cash in the bank in order to do that. So that's potentially a hurdle they've got to overcome. And the owners and directors test is another hurdle. The company's principal, Joshua Wanda, has a conviction. It's an historic conviction for drug trafficking. He was caught with 31 grams of cocaine in 2003 when he was a student, and that may ultimately stand against him, as might some of the other lawsuits that are facing its businesses in the United States.
I mean, fans instantly listening to that sort of a broader aspect of what they do and how that fits in as and when they sign the dotted line to become Everton's owners. The obvious concerns are, again, that word obvious from what you've said so far. How do Everton relate into what they do, i.e. on the football side of things, if they're going to be the seventh club here? Because the things that many people will have read and heard so far is that fans aren't happy with them in several of these different clubs that they've been in charge of. How much of a concern is that, in your opinion, when they take hold of Everton?
I think what's happened on the pitch at the clubs they've taken over, I think you can overlook that to a certain extent because they've only really been seriously involved for 2 years in that, and their strategy is to buy distressed assets, which effectively is what Everton are. So clubs that have either just been relegated or are just about to be relegated. So I don't think you can judge them on, say, Genoa getting relegated or Hertha Berlin getting relegated last season. You know the problems were already there, and it may well be that Everton get relegated this season. I've personally got massive concerns about the strength of our squad at the moment after the summer. So I don't, even if our proud 70-year-long record in the top flight goes, I don't necessarily think you can pin that on them either. What they're trying to do, and this is the purpose of a multi-club ownership model, is the idea that you have synergies between the clubs. So one of them is like a centralized scouting network where you pool all the data and knowledge that your scouts have. Another is a centralized data analytics service. Again, you don't want that duplicated at 6-7 different clubs because it's expensive and it'll have shortcomings. The idea is that, you can combine the knowledge and bring those costs down. The other idea behind multi-club ownership is that, you can trade players between them and you can develop those players. And it's really, really hard for a young player at a Premier League club to break through. And, you see it every season. Everton loan out players to Fleetwood or Oldham or whatever. Instead of doing that, they might loan them out to Standard Liège or Paris FC. And equally, if one of those clubs has a superstar player coming through, maybe when they're 18, 19, they're sold to Everton. The reality is that multi-club ownership hasn't actually ever worked like that. I mean, there's more than 200 clubs involved in multi-club models globally now. And very, very few players have sort of come through the ranks. And actually, one of the very, very few players to do that is Jack Harrison, who was at Man City and went to New York City and came back. And although he didn't break through at Man City, he went to Leeds United. And, that's an example of a player sort of coming through the ranks, but it's not really happened. I mean, those examples are few and far between. So, to my mind, it's an unproven model. And I interviewed 777's head of football, Don Dransfield, last year, and put that to him, and he said, well, it does take time, but he was at Man City for 10 years, and would you say Man City's multi-club ownership model has benefited the club at the top of the pyramid, City? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. The other side of all this as well was one of the big questions for most fans would be what is their interest in Everton? Basically, it was relatively simple to come and do that because Farhad Moshiri wants out. Farhad Moshiri, given his financial restrictions, which I think we spoke about a lot last time, that won't be their only reason, I would imagine, given the fact that we've got a massive stadium there that looks like it's going to be ready to be moved into, but nonetheless there are financial concerns with that. Would they be looking at that to be a big part of why they're actually coming to invest in Everton?
Well, I think Everton. I mean, we talked about this when we spoke earlier this year. I think Everton is a brilliant buy, and that's notwithstanding my my own support of the club and my family's support of the club. If you look at it objectively, foreign owners, particularly American owners, are desperate to buy into European sport because the cost of doing so in their own country is so expensive. If you want to set up a Major League Soccer franchise, you're looking at the bones of £1 billion to do so, because you have to pay, I think it's 150 million, or it's maybe even $200 million just to get a license in the MLS, and you also have to have a commitment to own your own stadium as well. So you build a new stadium, you're looking at 600-700 million. You're looking at 900 million just to get started. And when Bill Foley, who owns a Las Vegas sporting franchise, bought Bournemouth, he actually said that. He said, I've got a bargain here. People were saying, why are you buying Bournemouth? And he's like, well, it's 150 million. It's, less than a third.
Yeah.
less than a third of or a quarter of what I'd have to pay to get going in the States. So, it's a good buy. Everton's a massive club. It's got huge history, and it's got this new stadium. So they're buying it cheap, but on the verge, or I expect they're buying it cheap because we don't know what they're paying, but on the verge of something that's going to boost the club's financial profile massively. So in terms of the enterprise value, the actual value of the club, that's going to go up an awful lot. So, so long as they keep their Premier League status, which is not guaranteed, but that's going to go up an awful lot. In terms of how they make their money, I mean, there's a lot of questions that need to be asked here. One is, they've just made a bridging loan to Everton. Presumably they're confident they're going to take over the club. But at what rate are they making that loan? One of the reports about their airlines was, an airline that they own, they're simultaneously loaning money to it at an 18% interest rate. Are they going to do that with Everton? And who's ultimately going to pay the interest rate? It's going to be us, the supporters.
Yeah, and then, I mean, what I was going to say to you before you mentioned that, then literally the last sentence you come out with was this actually sounds a lot more positive than many people have presumed it's going to be. The financial side that the club's in, and what they essentially overtake when Moshiri goes and they've got the football club. We've heard a lot about that in recent months and weeks with MSP. I think rightly they've put £100 million loan in already. So that's right what I'm saying then, isn't it, James?
Yeah.
They've invested something. We're unable to go along with other companies who we've loaned money from because they don't have a guarantee back from the club itself that it could potentially still pay additional fees that it already owes. When they come in, it's not just simply a blank slate for Everton to be, well, we aren't in trouble here, we aren't in trouble there, we need loans here, we need loans there. When they come in, there'll be a lot of those things that still need to be sorted out.
Yeah, Everton need an injection of equity. They don't need more loans. They're loaned up up to the hilt. It's like having a mortgage on a house that you can't afford, and then you take a personal loan out to pay for that mortgage, and then you use your bank overdraft, and then you use your credit card, and it's going to catch up with you soon. So they need to have equity, and they need to put equity into the club for it to exist and survive as a business. And they've not been clear on their intentions to do that. And the track record suggests that they haven't actually made equity investments in any of the other clubs that they've done. And I think there's very serious and legitimate concerns based on other businesses that they've taken over where they've been late or haven't made capital repayments on time. Not least with the British Basketball League, which kicked off or is going to kick off 6 weeks late because contractors weren't paid. So it's stuff like that that causes anxiety, and I think it's fully justified. They've got an awful lot of answers that they need to give.
It's interesting today. We found out that Sean Dyche has been talking to them, and well, he just said over a cup of coffee, I think is what he said on his press conference towards the weekend. You mentioned there's things like the other clubs that they own. They can potentially talk about different players going from different places, ones that we've grown up with via our academy, which has been great over the years. They can send players off to there to prepare themselves to come back and play for us. And there are potentially players that we can go and buy or take from other clubs. You said that model is it's more popular than many people have say more popular. It's more common than many people have said. You mentioned a few hundred clubs have done that sort of thing. In terms of how the financial difficulties and potential penalties Everton could be due, given to the financial issues we've had. I mean, I kind of feel here, James, that it's like if you have balance in one hand and the other, it seems to be a lot. Although you said it's really cheap compared to what things are like that in America, to the financial issues we've just spoken about, and could potentially have even more so with issues and stuff that we'll get from independent groups looking at what's happening in the Premier League with Everton and other clubs. Would that not surely just weigh against why you would actually want to do this anyway, given the issues they've got with other things that they've got in stuff that they're invested in as well? That's, I think, something else that would add concerns to many Blues. What is the purpose of them coming in for us? Because there must be something more important than just getting Everton cheaper than they will get in a club in the United States or a franchise that they were to start in the United States.
I don't really know is the answer.
But that's what that is. As me you saying that, that's what I think we sat here both thinking. That to concern us anyway.
I mean, I think your question is, it's going to cost a load of money to turn Everton around, build a stadium, and bring in the players and so on. And they're facing issues already, so why buy Everton?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is totally me guessing, but maybe they have a big investor in the background, in the Gulf, or they obviously have they're American based. Maybe they have connections elsewhere in the world. Maybe they have someone who said, right, okay, I will come in, with big money if you buy a Premier League club, because they are genuinely sought after. And they'll not only have a Premier League club, they'll have a Serie A club, they'll have a La Liga club, they'll have a Bundesliga or a two Bundesliga club, and they'll have a French club and a Brazilian club. And if you're looking at external investment, that suddenly becomes quite attractive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But that's just me hypothesizing. I don't know the answer.
Yeah. Just before we finish, I wanted to go back to what we were talking about with the stadium. What issue is it at? Because again, you've just been guessing something then, speculating on what could potentially happen and why these guys may be interested in the club. With the stadium itself, financially, people are concerned. Does it need a big flow of cash going back into it to complete it? Where does that stand at the moment, James?
I don't know, because Fahad Mashiri's told us for years and years that the financing's sorted, and if it's not sorted, he'll pay for it himself, and that turns out to be absolute nonsense, doesn't it? So who actually knows what to believe? Everton as a club say that it's fine. I've not spoken to them this week. They said it was totally fine last week. But it is going to be a big pull on reserves. Not that we have any reserves. It's going to be a big pull on capital. Sorry, that's what I meant. And if you look back to when Arsenal moved into the Emirates 20 years ago, well, nearly 20 years ago, that was when Arsene Wenger had those great teams, and he was the Invincibles, and he was never able to quite build on them at a time when Roman Abramovich was making big waves at Chelsea. And the reason for that was because the money was being diverted into the stadium. So it does definitely have an impact on a football club. It's a huge drain. And if you haven't sorted that financing out, and you don't have access to your capital, as Fahad Mashiri quite evidently didn't after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, then it's a problem.
Finally, with 777, let's say in a week's time, whenever it is that they've signed over and Fahad Mashiri is gone, what can we sit and expect when we actually see something that they've done, or there's something that they've not done in effect, really? Because most fans will be looking at, well, there's a January transfer window coming up. Naturally, we need to sort this team out because we're still threatened by relegation. When would there be something from them that we actually look at and see, well, they've done this, they've done something Mashiri hadn't done, they've done something with the board, which I know that's another question that we couldn't answer, really. Bill Kenwright, another one, will be top of the list for many people. When Everton fans aren't going to see something done by them that we can visualise in short term, really, could they?
I don't think it's a given that they're going to take over. I think there's a lot of hurdles, which we talked about at the start of the conversation, that need to be overcome, regulatory and in terms of showing that finance. I don't think it's a given that even if they are approved, it'll be done by the end of the year, so by the start of the next transfer window. Sorry,
James, that would leave, until that happens, Mashiri would still be the owner, or would he have gone as well? And all we have is a boardroom that currently is the situation now, but without Mashiri around.
Well, I think he would stay on the board until the moment that he actually signs over his shares. I mean, that would be the normal thing. Whether he's very interested or prepared to put any more money in is another matter. Listen, I've probably sounded like a complete prophet of doom for the last half an hour. I think I'd say a couple of things in 777's defense. I don't think they've ever hidden. I mean, I've covered them as a sports news reporter for more than 2 years, and they've always been, pretty good in terms of putting their personnel forward to discuss things. They've generally been quite open. When Josemar, the Norwegian sports investigative website, did a very, very good investigation into their overall business affairs, they answered my questions, and we're quite happy to talk. Don Dransfield, who's their chief executive of football, I think if you're going to look for somebody who's done this multi-club ownership, I've talked about its weaknesses, he'd be the one person you want to do it, because he's got more experience than anybody else who's tried this before, through his experiences at Man City and now at 777. So I'd give those, I give them credit for those things. And maybe it won't all be bad. I don't know, but there's lots of questions that need answering now, and I think there's lots of uncertainty as to whether they can close this deal. And if they can't, there's lots of uncertainty about what happens next.